we're introducing endocrinology. And in endocrinology, it is the study of hormones. You've spent quite a lot of time on this in lab already, so some of this may be overview and some of this may be filling in some of those gaps. When we're studying hormones, of course, we need to think about what a hormone is. And a hormone is a signaling molecule that's transported by the blood to act on a distant target. So this is something that we've already talked about a little bit. This is a signaling molecule. It's got to be transported by the blood, and it's going to act on a distant target, something far away. So compare this to when we talked about paracrine and autocrine signals. So paracrine and autocrine signals are released into the interstitial fluid, and then they act locally. So they act close to that cell. There are three classes of hormones, and we're going to step through each of these. There are steroid hormones, amino acid hormones, amino acid derivatives, and peptide hormones. We've already discussed this in previous lectures, so try to recall something that we've already learned. And steroid hormones are all what? And they're all derived from what? Okay, so steroid hormones are all lipids, and they're all derived from cholesterol. They're all derived from cholesterol. You may remember that image of the 4 rings. So here it is. Steroid hormones, all of them are lipids, and they're all derived from cholesterol. And so you may remember that the way that you can always tell a steroid hormone is that 4-carbon ring. And let's think about lipids, right? So they're all lipids, and they're all derived from cholesterol. So just think for a moment about our body. And our body is composed largely of what? A lot of, if we remember the image of the human, and I kind of colored it in with different colors to represent how much of what we're made of. We're made of a lot of water. And our blood is mostly water. And these lipids need to get dumped into the blood to travel far away. Well, the way that they are able to travel far away is that most of them get bound to a protein carrier. So that protein carrier carries that steroid in the blood wherever it needs to go. And you can think of it as kind of protecting it. In previous lectures, the way we showed this was kind of like it was wrapped around it like this. So the steroid was kind of in here like this, and then the carrier was wrapped around it like this. I don't know why it's not permitting me to have multiple colors. There we go. That might be helpful. Maybe. Come on. Nope, it's not going to let me do that. Okay, apparently I am not permitted to change colors. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So, moving on. And the reason that steroids need to be carried by a protein is because of this thing that you're already really familiar with. Steroids are lipids. So if they were released into the blood without a protein carrier, then they would all sort of collect together. Water would cause them to sort of glob together, I guess is maybe a way that you could think about this. And they wouldn't be able to get anywhere in your and you would have some serious problems in your blood. Okay. So steroid hormones, as I said, they're derived from cholesterol. So let's think for a minute about what we know about the cell already. Steroid hormones are lipids, so they're lipophilic, they're lipid likers, or another way to think of this is hydrophobic. Don't really like water. So if we think about what steroid hormones are, where would you guess that you think the steroid receptors are located? Think back to our discussions of receptors. Are they going to be on the cell surface, or are they going to be inside of the cell? Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, The receptors for steroid hormones are going to be inside the cell. So they're lipophilic signal molecules. That's these right here, lipophilic signal molecules. They're lipophilic, they're lipids, right? They like lipids. And so that means they can pass through the phospholipid bilayer. And so their receptors are either going to be in the cytosol or they're going to be inside the nucleus. The vast majority of the time, what a steroid is going to do is it is going to trigger transcription and translation. So occasionally you will have a steroid hormone receptor that's right here, that's on the cell surface, but that's much more rare. It is possible, but it is much more rare. Usually what's going to happen when a steroid is released into the body to go do its job is that it's going to go talk to a receptor inside the cell. Maybe it's going to talk to a receptor in the cytoplasm, maybe it's going to talk to a receptor in the nucleus, but either way, eventually things are going to get to the nucleus. This receptor hormone complex, what it does is it binds to DNA and it either activates or it represses genes. So what it does is it influences transcription, the transcription of DNA to RNA. So remember central dogma, we go DNA, RNA, protein. Then, after we're transcribed to RNA, the cell has to go through translation to produce a new protein. And remember that proteins are what does the biological work. So when a steroid is released to go do its job, it finds its receptor, it has to travel in the blood, finds its receptor either in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus, triggers transcription, then translation to produce a new protein, and then the protein can go do its work. So as you might imagine, this process is rather slow. The results of a protein hormone, a steroid hormone being released into the blood, it takes time for there to be a result. Okay, next class is amino acid derivatives. And amino acid derivatives, they can act like steroid hormones, which is what we just talked about, or they can act like peptide hormones, which we're getting to. So you mechanistically, as far as how they behave, like where they bind their receptor and whether they trigger transcription and translation, or they trigger a second messenger cascade, which is what peptide hormones do. We can't differentiate them that way. That won't tell you if it's an amino acid derivative. So what I was just saying, there's no single clean mode of action. So with steroid hormones, there's a clean mode of action. With peptides, there's a clean mode of action. This isn't true with amino acid derivatives. Amino acid derivatives are derived from two primary amino acids, which is helpful, right? They're derived either from tryptophan or from tyrosine. These are the two amino acids that these hormones are derived from. Tryptophan produces melatonin. This is the hormone. And you may be familiar with melatonin as it's important to the sleep cycle and circadian rhythms, so awake and sleep. Tyrosine, however, gives rise to a whole mess of things. So this up here is tyrosine. This is its chemical structure. And tyrosine can give rise to two classes of amino acid derived hormones, amino acid derivatives. The first class is catecholamines. Catecholamines that you're probably familiar with are epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So these are like feel-good stuff, and these are sometimes fight or flight things. Something that's important about epinephrine is that it can be either a neurohormone or a neurotransmitter, depending on if it's secreted into the blood or if it's released adjacent to its target cell. Catecholamines act like peptide hormones. All catecholamines act like peptide hormones, and as I've highlighted here in the red box, catecholamines are made up of one tyrosine. They have one tyrosine. Thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, these are the ones that you often hear about when people say, I have low thyroid, when people maybe are extremely tired or they're unwell. They affect all sorts of systems. They're really, really important, and we are going to talk more about that. These guys act like steroid hormones. So stop and think for a minute. If they act like steroid hormones, where are their receptors? They act like steroid hormones. Where are their receptors? Hopefully you thought, oh, well, they're going to be either in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. So what they do is they stimulate transcription and translation, right? And the way that you can visually distinguish them is they have two tyrosines. Okay, derived from amino acids. You can visually distinguish them, or you can distinguish them, the catecholamines versus the thyroid hormones, based on their mode of action. Peptide hormones. If a hormone is not derived from cholesterol or an amino acid, it's pretty much peptide hormone. So cholesterol, derived from cholesterol, that's a steroid, right? An amino acid derived hormone is derived from an amino acid. So pretty much it's a peptide hormone. Most hormones are peptide hormones. The vast majority are peptide hormones. They're proteins, so that means they're lipophobic. You could also think of them as hydrophilic. Okay, they're lipophobic. They're proteins, so they can easily travel in the blood. They don't need a carrier. But think about whether or not for a minute they are going to be able to get through the phospholipid bilayer. Some examples of important peptide hormones, insulin and parathyroid hormone, there are a lot, and we're going to talk about that more. Peptide hormones are, they're all cool, but what's cool about peptide hormones, one of the many things, is that in order to make something happen, they have to signal the inside of the cell through what's called a second messenger. So if these little H and little H are representing peptide hormones. So this is the hormone, this is the chemical messenger. It's coming in from the blood, and it's going to come in and it's going to bind its receptor. We're familiar with this, right? Key in the lock. Going to bind its receptor. And then when it binds its receptor, what happens is that depending on what type of receptor it is, this receptor has to go talk to a whole bunch of other stuff. So maybe it goes over here and it talks to a G protein, and maybe that opens an ion channel. Or maybe it's connected to a tyrosine kinase right here, and then that has to go talk to a second messenger, or maybe here. Okay, so basically, when a peptide hormone binds its receptor, this sets off a cascade. It sets off a cascade of effects inside the cell that accomplish the desired effect. There are lots of different types of second messengers. So we've talked about these briefly before. You have a G protein coupled receptor, and that's when the receptor is quite literally coupled to, so if this is the receptor, it's coupled to, right here, an actual G protein. That protein is called a G protein. Then you have a receptor enzyme system where the receptor is actually bound to an enzyme. We're going to focus on the G protein coupled receptor to get this concept of a second messenger system. So the binding of the receptor, so if we have our hormone right here, comes and it binds the receptor right there. What that does is that activates the G protein. Bind the receptor, activates the G protein. The activated G protein can do a couple of different things. One of the things it can do is it can open an ion channel. So let's say it's activated, now it goes over here. All right, cool, opens that ion channel, now ions can freely flow through the channel. That's one of the things that it can do. Or that G protein can interact with what's called an amplifier enzyme. That's what that AE stands for. So G protein gets activated, goes and interacts with an amplifier enzyme. Enzymes, here they are again. They're so important. They regulate everything in the body. So this G protein activates this amplifier enzyme. The amplifier enzyme interacts with second messenger systems. It triggers a cascade of effects. We get things phosphorylated. A protein usually gets phosphorylated, and then this causes an intracellular response. So those of you who have taken biochemistry, maybe some other classes, you've actually learned about every detail of this second messenger system. We're not going to get into this intracellular details of that, but know that peptide hormones operate through a second messenger system, and that second messenger system triggers an intracellular cascade, and that this is fast. Okay, steroids are slow, peptide hormones are fast. The reason that peptide hormones are fast is because these, like this protein and the proteins involved in this intracellular response, are already made. They're already there hanging out and waiting in the cell. They don't have to be made. Okay. All right, so here's a table. I went ahead and put this here so that you could have all of this information in a table form. So what I'd like you to think about now is which amino acid derived hormone, so that's an amine right here, that's another word for an amino acid derived hormone, is an amine. Which of these catecholamines or thyroid hormones is going to produce a fast response?